Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to be working on the Metal Earth Star Wars series Millennium Falcon. Now I bought this a few years ago and I just never got around to building this one because I got kind of frustrated with one or two of the other Metal Earth series with Star Wars, specifically the TIE Fighter one. But this time, I have an arsenal of tools now that I can use, so we're going to be trying this one again. Inside the package, it has the instructional manual and 2 sheets of metal, and so we're going to start getting building very soon. I've always been a big fan of Star Wars ever since I was a kid, and one of the most famous ships is the Millennium Falcon. I think it's actually more popular than the X-Wing, but I think that's just my opinion. So now for the tools, I'm using a wire cutter, a tweezer, and then a round tip plier, and then a needle nose plier, and then an angled plier, and I'm also going to be using my X-Acto knife here and there, which I'm going to be using probably the number 11 and the number 2 blade. And as you can see, I have other pliers and tweezers just in case I might need it for specific bends. So for this model, there's actually 3 parts to this model, which is going to be your top half, and then your bottom half, and then you're going to have your stand. And so we're going to start off with the top half. So using a round tip plier, I actually start by bending a little bit at a time, and I don't try to get the final curve at once. I just do it a little bit evenly throughout, and then go again to do another layer and another layer until I get to the shape that I want. And in this case, it's not much of a bend that you need to do just because the disc is actually relatively flat. It's more of a conal shape more than anything else. And then we're going to connect it together and then bend the tab so that it becomes smooth. So I actually have the tab going from the outside to the inside, and so that you won't actually see the tab, a lot of times you're going to be exposing the tab, and so you would want to bend it. But in this case, I had the opportunity to actually hide the tab by putting the tab on from the top side instead. I'm going to be using a similar technique as the disc itself, and I'll be making a cylinder that is going to be for one of the discs that's going to be attached onto the top itself. And you want to try to make a regular circle shape. A lot of times when you're bending, you're going to get kind of an uneven edge, so you want to make sure that it's kind of smooth and round as much as possible. I'm going to be using the plier and sometimes a tweezer to be bending the tab because this will be exposed and you want to kind of get a very flat, smooth surface. Now for this piece that we're going to be attaching to that round piece, you're going to be actually bending the tab by actually twisting it instead of doing a fold, and this is because it's not going to be seen and you actually have the depths there for the tab to be sticking below. So a lot of times these twists are a lot easier just because all you have to do is just make sure to get a kind of firm 90-degree angle. I like using needle nose pliers because it has a long, smooth edge, and so for the longer pieces that you're seeing like right now, it's actually easier to bend it at once and have it be a straight edge, because a lot of times if you're using a different like smaller plier, you're going to be straightening out small pieces at a time that you're going to actually start getting some warped metals. So needle nose pliers is actually useful for just getting that straight edge. Be sure to look at the manual because they will recommend if you should bend the tab or if you should twist the tab. And in this case, since there will be a lot of void volume inside the between the 2 discs, you're able to actually twist a lot of the pieces that will attach to the top and the bottom discs. For cone shapes, what I actually do is use the round tip plier and put it at a slight angle instead of being straight with to the face. And this actually allows me to bend at a slight angle, and it actually gives me a nice conal shape. Some of these pieces are really small, so you're going to be seeing just my hands for the most part, or sometimes because it's such a small piece I have to actually get it closer to me that I actually do go off screen quite a bit in this video, which I apologize for. And for attaching a lot of the pieces onto the disc, make sure to look at the manual for the exact locations. A lot of times I'll be pausing to kind of look at the manual again just to make sure I'm putting in the right hole, because there are a lot of holes on the surface of the disc where you're going to be attaching a lot of the extra pieces. For this build, you're going to be seeing the same technique a lot for a cone shape or a curved shape or a cylinder shape, and it's going to be using the round tip plier. And the round tip plier is actually really useful for the Metal Earth series, just because if you're using a straight edge plier, a lot of times you're going to get creases or you're going to start scratching the surface. So I actually like the round tip plier a lot and use it for a lot of my builds. Since I actually built this Millennium Falcon, I've actually acquired a lot more pliers and tweezers, and you can never have enough pliers because each shape is different for different uses. I actually ended up getting another plier that's actually has a small tip edge that's sturdy enough, and I've been using that for a lot of my metal work just because I can actually get more into smaller crevices and spaces, and it's actually sturdy enough to actually bend the tab. So it's been really nice. And so you're going to see in later videos coming soon that a lot of the tools I'm using right now will be changed out. Like the needle nose plier, I've almost replaced out completely with the small tip nose plier, and the needle nose I use for just long surfaces now. I have to say the most difficult part about this build was actually the cockpit. The cockpit is the arm part that sticks out of the Millennium Falcon, which kind of gives it its classic look, and this involves a lot of really small circular, like cylindrical shapes, and it's actually really kind of hard to get in between all these spaces and bending everything to the right angle. So this probably is the most challenging part, because the other parts are relatively simple, except for maybe some small pieces where it is kind of hard to see, especially if you have like bad eyes like I do. So this is actually built in 3 parts. It is one single piece, but you're going to have 2 separate cylinder shapes that will be bent later to an angle about 45 degrees, I believe. But then at the end you have a cone shape that you're going to be putting together. So if you segment it out into 3 parts, it is actually easier to manage and build. So I actually just used my hands to bend the cockpit just because it was easier than trying to grab a plier, because I might put some force in by accident, and using my hands was actually just more pliable. When working on these pieces, make sure to look at the manual, because they will say which side is the exposed side or the non-exposed side. I believe they actually say engraved side and non-engraved side, and this is important because for this instance I'm actually just doing a bend, but instead of bending it down where you have your engraved side sticking out, we're actually doing almost like a concave where you're building the parts up, and so that it becomes more of a recessed piece that you're going to be adding onto the disc itself. So just make sure that you're not bending the wrong way, because a lot of times with these Metal Earths, it's not very forgiving if you bend it the wrong way, because once you bend it the wrong way and you have to bend it 180 degrees the other way, there is a high chance that the piece will actually snap off. And when you do, don't worry about it, just kind of use super glue, which is actually pretty useful for a lot of these Metal Earth builds because it does dry pretty quickly. But you just gotta be really careful when you're applying super glue, because if you use the wrong type of glue or if you use too much, and the way it dries, it will actually leave a white mark. So you want to try to be strategic about using glue when you need to. And for the bottom part of the disc, it is very similar in step as the top disc, so I will be skipping a lot of the steps just because it is very similar, and there's not much more explanation to do. The only part will be that the disc that you see the hole for, you'll add on later once you build the stand. So you're actually attaching this piece to the stand, and the stand has the circular shape on it. The bottom part actually comes together a lot quicker than the top part, just because the top part you're trying to figure out a lot of times how to bend it correctly or trying to shape it the right way. But since you've already done it once, the second half, which is the bottom, is actually a lot easier, and so it should go a lot faster, and you will kind of get more comfortable with the bending of the metal and actually shaping the curves. So overall it's actually a pretty easy and quick build, and when I say quick, it's still about a 3-hour to 4-hour build. So I know I said that the cockpit was actually the hardest part, but actually in my opinion this was actually the harder part, just because the small fins are so hard to build because they're so small, and I didn't really have proper tools to really bend it, because you have to bend it into like a U shape, but it is so thin in between that it's hard to kind of get the plier in between. But I did figure out a trick, which is I'm using the backside of the X-Acto knife to be able to bend the piece around it, and luckily the fin width is actually the same as the thickness of the blade. So all I did was put it on and kind of just pushed it down along the blade to get my U shape. Now putting it onto the body itself was a little bit harder, just because I didn't have the proper plier back then, or when I was building this, to actually get in between the gaps. So I had to kind of make do by using a tweezer and getting in and kind of bending it. And I actually bend it instead of twisting it, just because I didn't really have the proper tools for it. As I mentioned before, I actually stopped doing the Metal Earth series for the Star Wars for a few years, because the last build I did for the Star Wars a few years ago was the TIE Fighter, and that's the piece where I actually gave up in the middle and actually ended up throwing away the set just because I kept breaking the pieces. And granted, this was actually because I had the improper tools to work it, but the TIE Fighter is actually very difficult because the cockpit itself is a bunch of conal shapes to make it into a spear, and it is really hard to try to get the right curve on the cone, and then you're putting a front plate on it. And after that, I kind of had this knee-jerk reaction every time I see a curve on a Metal Earth model, just because I always had trouble with these curves. Since then, I've actually done a few Metal Earth series, and I got more and more comfortable with curve, especially getting the right tools now, where I had the round tip plier and some of the other tools, and using like my X-Acto knife to get the right shape. So it is something that I'm actually glad that I got back into, because now that I learned how to do this better, I feel like I'm kind of mastering a craft skill. So we are creating the sides for the base plate, and then the base plate will have the stand that goes on top of it, and then from the top you will actually be attaching the other pieces, kind of like a cake where you're stacking the build on top of each other. Sometimes I actually use the side of the plier that's thick just to kind of press down, because the weight of the plier itself and like just how sturdy it is actually makes it really nice for bending pieces sometimes. And I know sometimes I say that, I use a needle nose plier to be bending the shapes together, but honestly sometimes I actually start to bend by using my fingers first, just to get a little shape in, and then kind of finishing it up with needle nose plier just to straighten out the edges. Because if you're using your hands, sometimes one part will bend more than the other and it'll start warping, and then using that needle nose plier, and if I just crimp down on it, it will actually straighten out the edge again. Now that we're finishing up the base, we're going to be putting assembly together to finish off the whole model. And so here we're putting the bottom disc together to be attaching to the stand. The technique is exactly the same as the top disc part that goes on the top body, and so it's just going to be the same, bending the shape and then actually bending the tab into a 90-degree angle so that it's firm, and then you'll be attaching that actually to the stand itself, as you can see right now. And I'm just trying to orient it because I want to make sure that it is not offset by accident and kind of distributing the weight differently. So I wanted to make sure that it was done properly. Now we're going to be attaching the bottom half to the stand, and then once we're done with the bottom half, we're going to be shaping the side of the Millennium Falcon, which is going to be a strip of sheet metal. Actually about 3 sheet strips that you're going to be bending into shape, and it's going to be a mixture of straight edges and curves. So here I'm actually using my finger to kind of run across and kind of start bending the shape into a bigger curve wherever I need to, and then I'm actually finishing off the curve while I'm attaching it to the body itself, because I don't want to actually overshape this. And since this is a bigger arch, it is easier to actually shape it into place, and you won't really have a lot of bends. And so using the plier, we're going to be folding the tab so to get a kind of a smooth finish. I'm actually bending the tab outwards instead of inwards. Although I believe inwards will look cleaner, it was just with the plier I had, it was kind of the limitation of the plier, and I didn't want to kind of fold it in and then crimping down and accidentally warping the plate itself. And now we're going to be finishing up by attaching the top body, and this should be easy because the side of the Millennium Falcon is actually shaped by the bottom half, so now it should line up almost perfectly. I sometimes use the X-Acto knife to make sure the tab is pushed into the right hole, because sometimes it might be offset by like a hair. Now that the Millennium Falcon is complete, we're going to be actually finishing it off by creating the side disc that will be attached to the side body, and this kind of will finish the whole model look. So this model is a lot simpler than it actually looks. And as I said before, I was really afraid of curves, but after building this Millennium Falcon, I kind of got a confidence level back for with these Metal Earth series. So this is a great moderate, like intermediate level model. So you know, if you want a little bit of a challenge, I definitely would recommend this Millennium Falcon because it is pretty straightforward and there's like no real hidden tricks. So this is the final products, and as you can see here, I'm gonna include some detailed photos, and I think it looks great and not a lot of scratches or anything, and just the detail level is just awesome. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe or watch some of my other videos on my channel. Thank you.